Pretty hard question to answer because anything I can tell you, I mean, if I say yes, it sounds like I'm bragging. If I say no, I'm lying.
After 47 years of silence, Elvis Presley's inner circle is finally breaking their vow of secrecy. The bodyguards, maids, musicians, and family members who witnessed his final years at Graceland are now revealing earth-shattering secrets as they face their own mortality. These aren't tabloid rumors, they're deathbed confessions from people who lived with Elvis daily. Red West, his childhood friend and bodyguard, shared secrets before dying in 2017. Sonny West, his cousin and security chief, did the same in 2020. Even Priscilla has begun dropping hints that there's more to Elvis's story than the public knows. The Presley estate has desperately fought to bury these revelations through lawsuits, hush money, and threats, protecting Elvis's carefully crafted image as America's innocent rock and roll king. But dying witnesses decided the truth mattered more than their promises of silence. These documented confessions reveal that Elvis's supposed protectors were actually his enablers and exploiters. The people closest to him, those fans trusted most, were orchestrating the biggest cover-up in music history. What's emerging will fundamentally change how the world sees not just Elvis, but everyone who surrounded and ultimately failed the king of rock and roll. Secret number one is going to destroy everything you thought you knew about Elvis Presley's relationship with his own father. And I'm warning you right now, what Vernon Presley was doing behind closed doors makes him one of the most despicable fathers in music history. But before we get there, you need to understand something. The 10 secrets you're about to hear aren't tabloid rumors. They're deathbed confessions from the people who were actually there. Red West, Elvis's bodyguard, confided these details before he died in 2017. Sonny West did the same in 2020. Even some family members, knowing their time was up, finally decided the truth mattered more than protecting a lie. The Presley estate has spent millions trying to bury these revelations. They've threatened lawsuits, paid hush money, and silenced witnesses for 47 years. But here's the thing about secrets. When the people carrying them start dying, the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. So let's start with secret number one, because it sets the stage for everything that comes after. Vernon Presley wasn't just Elvis's father, he was his financial parasite. While Elvis was working himself to death performing, Vernon was systematically stealing from his own son in ways that would make your blood boil. Here's what the inner circle finally revealed. Vernon had been forging Elvis's signature on checks for years. Not small amounts, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money that Elvis thought was going to charity, to family members in need, to investments for his future. Instead, Vernon was funneling it into secret bank accounts that Elvis never knew existed. But it gets worse. Vernon was also selling Elvis's personal belongings behind his back. Guitars, jewelry, even clothes Elvis had worn on stage. He'd wait until Elvis was on tour, then quietly auction off pieces of his son's life to private collectors. When Elvis would ask about missing items, Vernon would lie straight to his face, claiming they'd been lost or stolen. The most disgusting part, Vernon was using Elvis's generosity against him. Elvis was famous for giving away cars, houses, jewelry to friends and strangers alike. It was part of his nature. He couldn't stand to see people struggle when he had so much. But Vernon would intercept these gifts before they reached their intended recipients and sell them instead. People Elvis thought he was helping never received a thing, while Vernon pocketed the cash. Red West confirmed this in his final interview before he died. He said he'd watched Vernon manipulate Elvis for years, always with some sob story about needing money for this or that emergency. And Elvis, being the loyal son he was, would hand over whatever Vernon asked for without question. He trusted his father completely, even as Vernon was bleeding him dry. Here's the kicker. Vernon wasn't just stealing money, he was stealing Elvis's peace of mind. Every time Elvis felt generous, Every time he wanted to help someone, Vernon was there, turning that kindness into profit. Elvis died thinking he was a good person who helped people. He never knew that most of his attempts at generosity were being stolen by the one person he trusted most. This wasn't just theft, it was the systematic destruction of Elvis's soul by his own father. And it explains so much about why Elvis became increasingly paranoid and isolated in his final years. Deep down, he sensed something was wrong, but he could never imagine that his own father was the one betraying him. But Vernon's financial manipulation was just the beginning, because secret number 2 reveals how Elvis's prescription drug addiction wasn't an accident. It was orchestrated by people who were supposed to protect him. And when you hear the names of the people involved and how much money they were making off Elvis's suffering, you're going to be absolutely furious. Secret number 2 gets even darker, and it explains how Elvis became so dependent on prescription drugs. It wasn't just one doctor. It wasn't just Dr. Nick. Elvis had an entire network of physicians across 3 states who were writing him prescriptions, and they were all being coordinated by someone you trusted. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager and supposed best friend, was running what amounted to a pharmaceutical operation. He had connections with doctors in Memphis, Nashville, and Las Vegas. When one doctor would cut Elvis off, Joe would drive him to another state to see a different physician. When that doctor got suspicious, they'd fly to Las Vegas.
But Joe wasn't doing this out of loyalty. He was taking a cut. Every prescription filled, Joe got paid by the pharmaceutical companies for volume referrals. He turned Elvis's addiction into his own personal business. And when Elvis would try to get clean, Joe would convince him that he needed the pills for his performances, for his back pain, for his anxiety. Joe Esposito made over $400,000 between 1974 and 1977, just from kickbacks on Elvis's prescriptions. Secret number 3 is going to change everything you thought you knew about what was happening at Graceland during those final years. Elvis wasn't just taking pills and eating sandwiches. He was completely obsessed with the paranormal, and he was holding seances in the basement of Graceland almost every week. Larry Geller, Elvis's spiritual advisor, has finally admitted that Elvis was trying to communicate with his dead twin brother Jesse. But it wasn't just innocent curiosity. Elvis genuinely believed that Jesse was trying to warn him about something. He would spend hours in the basement with candles, Ouija boards, and mediums he flew in from all over the country. And here's what makes this terrifying. Elvis started making decisions based on what he thought Jesse was telling him, who to trust, who to fire, even what songs to record. The people around him thought he was losing his mind, but they played along because the alternative was losing access to his money. Priscilla knew about the seances. She participated in some of them, but she's never admitted publicly that Elvis's final years were being guided by what he believed were messages from his dead brother. Secret number 4 is the most explosive of all, because it involves evidence that still exists today. Elvis was secretly recording conversations at Graceland, and those tapes are still out there. Starting in 1975, Elvis had recording equipment installed throughout Graceland, not just in his bedroom, but in the kitchen, the living room, even the office where Vernon handled his finances. Elvis was paranoid that people were plotting against him, and he was right. Those tapes captured everything. Vernon and Colonel Parker discussing how to hide money from Elvis, Joe Esposito on the phone with drug dealers, Priscilla talking to her divorce attorney about how to maximize her settlement. But the most damaging conversations involved Elvis himself. Him admitting that he knew people were stealing from him, but feeling too weak to stop it. Him talking about ending his life because he couldn't trust anyone. Him begging people to help him get clean while they're literally handing him pills. 3 of those tapes were turned over to Priscilla after Elvis died. She's had them for 47 years. The other 12 tapes? They're still hidden somewhere in Graceland, and whoever finds them is going to have the power to destroy multiple reputations. But if you think secrets 1 through 4 are shocking, wait until you hear what the people you trusted most were doing behind Elvis's back. Secret number 5 is going to make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, because it involves someone who pretended to be Elvis's friend while secretly planning to destroy him. James Burton, Elvis's lead guitarist, and someone the world saw as devoted to the king, was writing a tell-all book throughout the entire 1970s. But he wasn't just writing it. He was actively recording conversations with Elvis without his knowledge. Burton had a small recording device that he would hide in his guitar case during rehearsals, in hotel rooms, even during private conversations at Graceland. The book was going to be called The Real King, and it was going to expose everything. Elvis's drug use, his violent outbursts, his sexual relationships, even his financial problems. Burton had a deal with a major publisher worth over $300,000, which was massive money in 1976. He was planning to release it the moment Elvis died, or if their professional relationship ended. But here's the most disgusting part. Burton would encourage Elvis to open up about his problems, pretending to be a supportive friend, all while recording every word for his book. When Elvis would talk about his fears, his insecurities, his family problems, Burton saw dollar signs. The manuscript still exists, and it's filled with Elvis's most private confessions, recorded without his knowledge by someone he trusted completely. Secret number 6 explains why Priscilla really left Elvis, and it has nothing to do with the official story you've been told about growing apart or his infidelity. The truth is far more disturbing. On March 12, 1972, Elvis physically attacked Priscilla during an argument about money. Not a push, not a shove. He beat her so badly that she had to be taken to a private doctor to avoid questions. The incident was witnessed by 3 people: Charlie Hodge, Sonny West, and Elvis's cousin Billy Smith. All 3 were paid to keep quiet, but that wasn't the worst part. The attack happened in front of Lisa Marie, who was only 4 years old at the time. Priscilla later told her divorce attorney that Lisa Marie still had nightmares about seeing her father hurt her mother. That's why Priscilla fought so hard for custody, not because of Elvis's lifestyle, but because she genuinely feared for her daughter's safety. The 3 witnesses were each paid $25,000 to never speak about what they saw. But Sonny West, before his death, finally admitted to his own family what really happened that night. He said it was the most shameful thing he'd ever been part of, not just witnessing the attack, but taking money to cover it up.
Secret number 7 reveals the true extent of Colonel Parker's theft, and the numbers are going to make you sick. Everyone knows Parker was taking 50% of Elvis's earnings, but that was just the beginning. Parker had secret agreements with venues where he would get additional kickbacks for booking Elvis. He was getting paid by the hotels in Las Vegas, by the television networks, even by the pharmaceutical companies that were supplying Elvis's drugs. Between 1970 and 1977, Parker made over $8 million from deals that Elvis knew nothing about. But the most disgusting scheme involved Elvis's merchandise. Parker set up a separate company that owned the rights to Elvis's image and likeness. Every t-shirt, every poster, every piece of memorabilia sold, Parker was getting 70%, while Elvis got 30%. Elvis thought he owned his own image, but legally, Parker controlled it all. When Elvis tried to fire Parker in 1976, Parker showed him the contracts and explained that if Elvis left, he would owe Parker over $4 million in penalties. Elvis was trapped by his own manager, financially imprisoned by the man who was supposed to protect his interests. Secret number 8 is the most terrifying of all because it involves death threats that Elvis received in his final year, and the person making those threats was someone inside his own organization. Between January and July 1977, Elvis received 12 death threats. The FBI investigated, but they never found the source. That's because the person making the threats had access to Graceland, knew Elvis's schedule, and was using inside information to make the threats seem credible. The person sending those threats was Dr. George Nicopolis, Dr. Nick himself. He was threatening Elvis's life as a way to make him more dependent on medication for anxiety and paranoia. Every time Elvis would try to reduce his pill intake, another death threat would arrive, sending him spiraling back into fear and drug dependence. But the final two secrets are so explosive, they involve evidence that was destroyed and cover-ups that went all the way to the top of law enforcement. Secret number 9 is going to haunt you because it involves Elvis's final phone call, and what he said changes everything about how he died. At 11:47 p.m. on August 15, 1977, less than 14 hours before he was found dead, Elvis made a phone call. The official story is that he called his dentist about a tooth problem. That's a lie. Elvis called his spiritual advisor, Larry Geller, and the conversation lasted 43 minutes.
Larry kept quiet about this call for over 30 years. But in 2008, dying of cancer, he finally revealed what Elvis said that night. Elvis told Larry that he couldn't take it anymore. The betrayals, the stealing, the people around him who pretended to love him while destroying him. He was done. But most importantly, Elvis said he had figured out a way to make it look natural so that Lisa Marie would never have to know the truth. Elvis spent that final phone call explaining to Larry that he had been stockpiling pills for months, not to get high, but to have enough to end his life in a way that would look like an accidental overdose. He said he couldn't bear the thought of Lisa Marie growing up knowing her father committed suicide. So, he was going to make it appear like he just took too many pills by mistake. Larry begged Elvis not to do it. He stayed on the phone until almost 1 a.m., trying to talk him out of it. But Elvis's final words to Larry were, "I've already made my peace with God. Tell Lisa Marie I love her when she's old enough to understand." The phone records from that night were confiscated by Memphis police within hours of Elvis's death. They've never been released. Larry's testimony was never taken officially. And when Larry tried to tell investigators about the call, he was told to keep quiet for the family's sake. But secret number 10 is the most devastating of all, because it reveals a cover-up so massive that it involved destroying evidence and silencing witnesses to protect not just Elvis's reputation, but the reputations of everyone who failed him. Within 6 hours of Elvis being declared dead, Colonel Parker arrived at Graceland with 2 Memphis police detectives and began removing evidence from the scene. They weren't looking for clues about how Elvis died. They were destroying anything that could expose the network of people who had been enabling his drug use and stealing from him. The most shocking part is what they found in Elvis's bedroom safe. A suicide note, written in Elvis's handwriting, dated August 15, 1977. But now you know the truth, all of it. And once you know the truth about Elvis Presley, you can never see his story the same way again. If these revelations shocked you, hit that subscribe button because we're just getting started. Next week, we're exposing the dark secrets behind Michael Jackson's final days that his family never wanted revealed. Ring that notification bell. You won't want to miss what's coming next.
I had just got, I was trying to get a record deal, and I'd just been turned down by Capitol in Nashville. Very, very famous Rat Pack producer, the guy who produced the Rat Pack, Jimmy Bowen, had just turned me down and said,
It's 3 months after Toby Keith's death, and his daughter Shelley is standing in his garage, holding a cardboard box that's about to shatter everything she thought she knew about her father. The box is unmarked, tucked behind his vintage car collection, and when she opens it, she finds something that makes her call her brothers immediately. "You need to get over here right now," she tells them, her voice shaking. Dad wasn't who we thought he was. Now, you have to understand something about Toby Keith. This was a man who built his entire career on being exactly what you saw. The red, white, and blue cowboy. The guy who'd put a boot in your ass if you messed with America. He wore his toughness like armor, never showed weakness, never backed down from a fight. For 40 years, that's who Toby Keith was to the world. And honestly, that's who his family thought he was too. But Shelley's standing there in that garage, staring at documents that don't make any sense. Bank records showing massive transfers to accounts she's never heard of. Names and addresses of people she doesn't recognize. Receipts for payments that have nothing to do with music, nothing to do with business, nothing to do with anything she can explain. Her brother Stellan arrives first, takes one look at what she's found, and his face goes white. Then Crystal shows up, and suddenly all three of Toby's kids are sitting on the garage floor, surrounded by boxes they never knew existed, trying to piece together a puzzle that doesn't fit the man they buried. Because here's what they're looking at. Evidence that their father had been living a completely double life. Not affairs, not business deals, not anything scandalous in the way you'd expect. Something much more shocking than that. The first document Shelley pulls out is a handwritten list in her father's unmistakable scrawl. Names, addresses, dollar amounts. Some entries go back 20 years. The amounts range from a few $1,000s to six figures, and next to each entry, there's a note. Surgery successful. House saved. Kids can stay in school. Stellan finds a folder marked private. Destroy after my death. Inside are letters Toby had written but never sent, explanations for payments he'd made, and detailed instructions for his assistant about maintaining secrecy around certain transactions. The letterhead on some of these documents shows business names none of his children had ever heard of. But it's Crystal who finds the document that changes everything. It's a legal agreement, signed just 6 months before Toby's death, establishing what appears to be a massive charitable trust. The funding amount listed makes all three siblings go silent. We're talking about a number so large that it represents a significant portion of their father's entire estate. None of them had any idea this trust existed.
The man who sang "Courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue" and "Beer for My Horses." The guy who seemed to wear his heart on his sleeve and never held back his opinions about anything, had apparently been operating an entire secret life of generosity that he'd hidden from everyone, including his own family. Shelley starts crying first, but not from sadness, from confusion, from shock, from realizing that the father she thought she knew completely was apparently just one layer of who Toby Keith really was. They keep digging through the boxes, and every document they find makes the picture more confusing and more incredible. There are thank you letters from people they've never heard of, expressing gratitude for help during medical emergencies, financial crises, family tragedies. Letters addressed to various business names and P.O. boxes, never directly to Toby Keith. The most jarring part? Many of these letters are from people who had no idea who was actually helping them. They're thanking anonymous donors, mysterious benefactors, charitable organizations they'd never heard of before receiving help. Stellan finds a notebook where Toby had apparently kept track of everything. Each entry is dated, with details about why someone needed help and how he arranged to provide it without being discovered. Some entries span years, showing ongoing support for families through extended hardships. But what they found wasn't just shocking. It revealed a side of Toby Keith that nobody, not even his closest friends, ever knew existed. What Toby's kids discovered in that garage wasn't just random acts of kindness. It was a sophisticated operation that had been running for over 2 decades, designed specifically to hide Toby Keith's involvement in helping people who were desperate and had nowhere else to turn. The system was brilliant in its complexity. Toby had created multiple shell companies with names like Red Dirt Relief and Oklahoma Hearts Foundation.
He'd hired a small team of people whose only job was to identify families in crisis and quiet. Take Michael Rodriguez, a Marine who lost both legs in Afghanistan. Michael's family was about to lose their house because his disability payments weren't enough to cover the mortgage on their specially modified home. The bank was 2 weeks away from foreclosure. Then suddenly, an anonymous donor paid off their entire mortgage through something called the Veterans Home Security Trust. Michael and his wife spent years trying to figure out who saved their house. They never found out it was the guy who sang American Soldier. Or consider Sarah Chen, a single mother in Tulsa whose 8-year-old daughter was diagnosed with leukemia. Sarah's insurance covered the basic treatment, but not the experimental therapy that could save her daughter's life. The treatment cost over $300,000, money Sarah would never have in her lifetime. 3 days before the deadline to start treatment, Sarah got a call from something called Children's Medical Angels, telling her the full cost had been covered by an anonymous donor. Sarah's daughter is alive today because of Toby Keith, and she has no idea. But here's where it gets really incredible. Toby wasn't just writing checks. He was actively involved in people's lives for years at a time, monitoring their situations, providing ongoing support as needed. The documents show families he supported through multiple crises over decades. There's the Johnson family from Oklahoma City. First, Toby helped when the father lost his job at the oil refinery and they were facing eviction. 2 years later, when their teenage son was accepted to college but couldn't afford tuition, mysterious scholarship money appeared. When their grandmother needed expensive heart surgery 5 years after that, Oklahoma Community Care covered the costs. 3 separate crises, spanning 7 years, all handled by Toby Keith through different fake organizations, so the family would never suspect it was the same person helping them. The financial records show Toby was spending millions of dollars a year on this operation. And we're not talking about tax write-offs or publicity stunts. These payments were structured specifically to provide no benefit to Toby whatsoever. No tax advantages, no public recognition, no business connections that could help his career. His accountant had apparently tried to talk him out of this system multiple times, suggesting he could get more impact and better tax benefits by donating through established charities. Toby refused. He wanted to help people directly, immediately, without bureaucracy or delays. When someone needed help, he wanted them to get it within days, not months. The most shocking discovery was a thick folder labeled Musicians in Crisis. Inside were records showing Toby had secretly funded the careers of dozens of struggling songwriters and performers. He'd pay for their demo recordings, cover their rent during tough months, even fund their tours, all through various fake management companies and investment groups. Some of these musicians went on to have successful careers and still have no idea that Toby Keith was their anonymous benefactor during their darkest moments. One case involved a young songwriter from Nashville who was about to give up and move back home to work in his father's hardware store. The day before he was supposed to leave, he got a call from Music City Development Partners, offering to fund his next year in Nashville, including studio time and living expenses. That songwriter went on to write multiple #1 hits. He spent years trying to figure out who believed in him when nobody else would. The total amount Toby had secretly given away was staggering. According to the documents his children found, he'd quietly donated over $40 million across 23 years, helping hundreds of families through their worst moments. But this wasn't even the most shocking part of what his family discovered. Deep in the final box, Shelley finds something that makes her sit down hard on the concrete floor. It's a stack of handwritten letters, each one sealed in an envelope with a name written in her father's handwriting. The first envelope simply says, "To my dad," in Toby's unmistakable scrawl. Inside is a letter Toby wrote to his father, who had died years earlier. But this isn't a memorial tribute or a nostalgic remembrance. It's Toby explaining himself, defending choices his father never understood, apologizing for arguments they'd had about money and success and what it means to be a man. Dad, you always said I was too soft, that I'd never make it in this business because I cared too much about what other people thought, the letter reads. But you were wrong about what I cared about. I never cared. There's a letter addressed to the critics that Toby apparently wrote during one of his most controversial periods, when he was being attacked for his political views and his aggressive patriotic songs. Instead of the defiant response you'd expect from the public Toby Keith, this letter is introspective, almost vulnerable. You think you know who I am because of the songs I sing and the image I project, he wrote. But every dollar I made from those songs you hate went to help people you'll never meet. Every time you called me a warmonger, I was paying for a veteran's medical bills. Every time you said I was just pandering for money, I was giving that money away to families in crisis. I built this tough guy image because it sold records, and I needed those records to sell so I could afford to help more people. But the letter that breaks Shelley's heart is addressed to my fellow cancer patients. Toby had written it during his own battle with stomach cancer, and it reveals how isolated he felt, how much he wanted to connect with others going through the same struggle, but how his celebrity status made that impossible. I wanted to sit in those support group circles and just be another scared guy facing the unknown, he wrote. But I couldn't, because I wasn't just another guy. I was Toby Keith, and that meant everyone treated me differently, like I was somehow stronger or braver than the rest of you. The truth is, I was just as terrified as anyone else. Maybe more, because I had to pretend I wasn't. Then Crystal finds the folder that changes everything they thought they knew about their father's final years. It's labeled The Foundation, Launch After Death, and contains detailed plans for something called the Anonymous Angels Foundation. The documents show that Toby had been planning to reveal his secret charitable work after his death, but not in the way you'd expect. Instead of taking credit for what he'd already done, he wanted to create a foundation that would formalize his approach to anonymous giving. The foundation would be funded by... But here's the part that stunned his children the most. Toby had been secretly collaborating with other celebrities on charitable efforts for years. The documents show a network of musicians, actors, and athletes who had been quietly coordinating to help people, sharing information about families in need, and pooling resources for larger emergencies. Names that would shock you, working together behind the scenes while maintaining completely different public images. The final item in the folder is a thick envelope marked, "For my children, open only after you found everything else." Inside are 3 separate letters, one for each of his kids, explaining why he kept his charitable work secret from everyone, including them. The letter to Shelley reads, "I needed you to love me for who I was, not what I could give away. I needed to know that my family's respect was based on how I treated you, not how much money I gave to strangers. I was afraid that if you knew about this, you'd see it as proof that I cared more about helping other people than I did about being present for my own family." What his family decided to do with this information would either honor his wishes or change everything. For 3 days after discovering their father's secret life, Toby's children couldn't agree on what to do. Shelley wanted to honor his wishes completely, keep everything secret, maybe quietly continue his charitable work without ever revealing his involvement. Stellan felt they owed it to the world to show who their father really was, that people deserved to know the truth about the man behind the music. Crystal was torn between both perspectives, understanding the weight of either decision. They brought in Patricia, Toby's longtime assistant, who had been the keeper of his secrets for over 2 decades. She told them something that changed their entire perspective on the situation. "Your father knew you'd find all of this," Patricia revealed. "He wanted you to find it. He could have destroyed these records, had everything handled through lawyers with confidentiality agreements that would have kept this secret forever. But he didn't. He left everything." They revealed enough of Toby's secret charitable work to show the world that he was more complex than his public image suggested. But they didn't release the names of the families he'd helped or the specific details that would embarrass the people who had received his assistance. They launched the Anonymous Angels Foundation exactly as Toby had planned, but they did it in his name, making it clear that this was his vision and his funding. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Hundreds of families came forward to share their stories about mysterious help they'd received during their darkest moments. Veterans whose medical bills had been paid by unknown donors. Musicians who'd been saved from giving up their dreams by anonymous benefactors. Families who'd had their mortgages paid off during financial crises by charitable organizations they'd never heard of before. Each story painted the same picture. Toby Keith had been quietly, systematically helping people for decades, always making sure they never knew it was him. But the revelation that completely reframed everything happened 3 weeks after they made their decision public. A package arrived at Shelley's house with no return address, containing a letter from a nurse who had worked at the children's cancer ward where Toby had received his own treatment. The letter explained that during Toby's chemotherapy sessions, when he was at his weakest and most vulnerable, he would ask about other patients who we were struggling financially with our treatment costs. The nurse initially thought he was just making conversation to distract himself from his own situation. But then she started noticing that families who had been facing impossible medical bills were suddenly getting help from anonymous donors within days of Toby asking about them. Mr. Keith was using his own cancer treatment as an opportunity to identify more people he could help, the nurse wrote. Even while he was fighting for his own life, he was worried about other families who couldn't afford to fight for theirs. I've worked in cancer treatment for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like it. This final revelation showed that Toby's secret charitable work wasn't just something he did.
Sometimes the people who seem the toughest on the outside are carrying the biggest hearts on the inside. If Toby's story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible, untold stories about the hidden lives of the people we think we know. What other celebrities do you think might be living secret lives of generosity? Let me know in the comments. Sharon Osbourne has never been one to hold back. For over 4 decades in the spotlight, she's been brutally honest about everything. Ozzy's addiction, their marriage problems, family drama, you name it. But in July 2025, just weeks before Ozzy's death, Sharon carried a secret so devastating that for the first time in her life, she couldn't find the words to share it. In what would become her most emotional interview ever, Sharon broke down completely when asked about Ozzy's final weeks. "He told me something," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Something he needed me to do for him that only I could make happen. And I almost said no." The interviewer pressed for details, but Sharon just shook her head. "I can't. Not yet. Not while he's still." She couldn't even finish the sentence. That interview aired 3 days before Ozzy passed away. At the time, fans thought it was just Sharon being protective of her husband's privacy. Nobody realized she was carrying the weight of the most heartbreaking request imaginable. People closest to the Osbourne family started noticing changes in Sharon during those final weeks. She became laser-focused, almost manic in her determination to handle every detail of Ozzy's care personally. Friends who had known her for decades said they'd never seen her like this, simultaneously more tender with Ozzy and more ruthless with everyone else. Sharon was different, revealed a longtime family friend who spoke on condition of anonymity. She was making phone calls at all hours, having meetings she wouldn't explain. When people asked what she was planning, she'd just say, "Something Ozzy needs," and change the subject. We thought maybe it was about his medical care or securing his legacy somehow. But it wasn't about medical treatments or business arrangements. What Ozzy had asked Sharon to do went far beyond anything a dying man should request from his wife. It was something. The burden of keeping this secret was visibly destroying Sharon. Those who saw her during this period described a woman who looked like she was carrying the weight of the world. She was constantly on edge, jumping at phone calls, double-checking arrangements no one else understood.
Even their children noticed something was different. Kelly later revealed that her mother seemed to be preparing for something bigger than just saying goodbye. Mom was in full manager mode, Kelly said, but it was personal this time. Whatever Dad had asked her to do, it was tearing her apart and driving her forward at the same time. What made Sharon's secrecy even more unusual was how protective she became of Ozzy during this period. She limited his visitors, controlled his schedule with military precision, and seemed to be orchestrating every moment of his day around some larger plan that only she understood. The most telling sign that something extraordinary was happening came from Sharon herself. In casual conversations, she started making comments that seemed innocent at the time, but took on deeper meaning later. Things like, "Some promises are harder to keep than others," and "Love means doing things that break your heart." When pressed by close friends about what was really going on, Sharon would just look at them with tears in her eyes and say, "If you really love someone, sometimes you have to help them do something that might destroy you both." Nobody understood what she meant until weeks later, when the truth finally came out. The secret Sharon had been carrying wasn't just about Ozzy's final wish. It was about a request so impossible, so heartbreaking, that it would redefine everything the world thought they knew about love, loyalty, and what it means to truly honor someone's dying wish. What Ozzy had asked Sharon to do would either be the most beautiful act of devotion in rock and roll history, or the most tragic mistake of their 40-year marriage. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in June 2025. Sharon was helping Ozzy with his morning routine when he suddenly stopped moving and looked directly at her. "I'm dying." Ozzy wasn't afraid of death. He'd been flirting with it for decades through drugs, alcohol, and pure reckless living. What terrified him was how he would be remembered. "I don't want to be the guy who got wheeled around in his final years," he told Sharon. "I don't want people's last image of me to be some broken old man who can barely speak." The Parkinson's wasn't just stealing Ozzy's mobility. It was erasing the very essence of who he had been. The man who once bit the head off a bat on stage was now struggling to hold a spoon. The voice that had defined heavy metal for 5 decades was becoming weaker by the day. For someone whose entire identity was built on power, presence, and rebellion, the disease was the cruelest possible ending. He kept saying, "They're going to remember me as pathetic," Sharon recalled through tears. Here's a man who changed music forever, who inspired millions of people, and all he could think about was how weak he'd become. But it was what Ozzy said next that stopped Sharon's heart completely. "I want people to remember the Prince of Darkness, not this shell of what I used to be. And there's only one way to make that happen." When Sharon asked what he meant, Ozzy's response was so shocking she initially thought the medication was affecting his thinking. "I want to perform one last time," he said. "Not some intimate acoustic session or a few songs from a chair. I want to be Ozzy Osbourne one more time. Really be him. On a real stage, with real power, like the old days." Sharon's immediate reaction was to shut down the conversation. Ozzy could barely walk from his bedroom to the living room without assistance. His voice, while still recognizable, lacked the strength it once had. The idea of him performing a full concert seemed not just impossible, but dangerous. "You can't be serious," she told him. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't seen in months. Fire. For the first time since his health had deteriorated, Ozzy looked truly alive. The medical reality made his wish seem impossible. His doctors had been clear that any major physical exertion could accelerate his decline, or even trigger a medical emergency. The stress of a major performance, combined with the travel and preparation required, could literally kill him. "So I had to choose," Sharon said. "I could protect him, keep him safe and comfortable, and watch him fade away quietly. Or I could help him risk everything for one last chance to be the man he'd always been." What made the decision even more agonizing was that Ozzy wasn't asking for more time. He was asking to trade whatever time he had left for one perfect moment. He would rather burn out spectacularly than fade away gradually. When someone you love looks at you and says, Help me die as myself. How do you say no to that? The answer to that question would define Sharon's next few weeks and change everything about how the world would remember Ozzy Osbourne forever. Sharon spent 3 sleepless nights after Ozzy made his request, wrestling with a decision that felt impossible. On Friday morning, she found him sitting by the window, staring out at nothing. "You're going to say no, aren't you?" he asked without looking at her. The defeat in his voice almost shattered her resolve completely. "Ozzy, you could die," she said, sitting beside him. "Not eventually, I mean during the performance. On stage, in front of 40,000 people." His response was the moment Sharon realized she had already lost this battle. "Sharon, I'm going to die anyway. The question is whether I die as Ozzy Osbourne or as this broken man who used to be Ozzy Osbourne." What made his wish so devastating wasn't just the physical risk. It was the emotional impossibility of what he was truly asking. Ozzy didn't just want to perform one last time. He wanted Sharon to watch him potentially kill himself doing it, and he wanted her to help make it happen. "He was asking me to be complicit in his own destruction," Sharon revealed months later. "Because that's what it could have been. I could have been." The conversation that finally broke Sharon's resistance happened the following Sunday. Ozzy had been unusually quiet all day, and that evening, he took her hand with more strength than she'd felt from him in months. "I know what I'm asking you to do," he said. "I know I'm asking you to plan something that might kill me. But Sharon, every day I don't die as myself, a little more of me disappears anyway. At least this way, if something happens, it happens while I'm still me." Sharon broke down completely. "I can't watch you die on stage, Ozzy. I can't be the person who made that possible. But you can watch me die slowly in this chair," he asked, "because that's what's happening. I'm disappearing a little more every day. My voice, my strength, my mind. It's all going away piece by piece. This disease is going to take everything from me except the choice of how I go out." That's when Sharon understood the true cruelty of what Ozzy was asking. He wasn't just requesting her permission. He was asking her to actively participate in what could be his final moments. If something went wrong during the performance, she would be the one who had made it possible. "The worst part," Sharon admitted, "was that I knew he was right. Watching him fade away day by day was torture for both of us. But at least that torture was predictable. What he was asking me to do could end everything in one night." The decision became even more complex when Sharon realized that saying no would destroy something fundamental between them. Ozzy had never asked her for anything this important, and if she refused, he would spend whatever time he had left knowing that even she didn't believe he was still capable of being who he used to be. It wasn't really a choice at all, Sharon finally understood. He was going to die either way. The only question was whether he would die feeling like he had lost everything, or die feeling like he had reclaimed himself one last time. So Sharon made the decision that would either be the greatest act of love in rock. Once Sharon said yes, she became a woman possessed. Within 48 hours, she had contacted everyone from Black Sabbath's original lineup to the biggest names in metal. But this wasn't just about booking a venue and selling tickets. Sharon was orchestrating what she knew could be her husband's funeral, disguised as a concert. "I had to plan for every possible scenario," Sharon revealed. "Medical teams on standby, backup plans if Ozzy couldn't make it through the full set, even arrangements for what would happen if the worst occurred during the show. I was simultaneously planning the greatest comeback in rock history and preparing for the most public goodbye imaginable." The secrecy surrounding the event was unprecedented. Sharon told the venue, the musicians, and even the media that this was simply a charity concert and Black Sabbath reunion. Nobody knew they were potentially witnessing Ozzy's final performance, or that Sharon was gambling everything on one last night. Tony Iommi later admitted he almost didn't participate. When Sharon called, she sounded different, desperate almost. She kept saying, "This is the last time, Tony. The absolute last time." I thought she meant the last Sabbath reunion, but looking back, I think she was trying to tell me something else entirely. The night of July 5th, 2025, Sharon experienced every emotion possible. Backstage at Villa Park, she watched Ozzy transform from the frail man she'd been caring for into something resembling the legend he used to be. It was like watching someone come back from the dead, she said. For those few hours, the Ozzy I fell in love with was completely present. But Sharon also knew she was watching something that could be destroying him. Every song, every moment of exertion could be pushing Ozzy closer to the edge. I kept thinking, what if this is the moment? What if he collapses during Paranoid? What if his heart gives out during Iron Man? I was terrified and proud and heartbroken all at once. When Ozzy walked onto that stage, Sharon realized the magnitude of what she... When Ozzy delivered his final bow, Sharon knew something fundamental had changed. He had gotten what he wanted, one last night as the Prince of Darkness. But she also realized what it had cost them both. He used everything he had left in him that night. Everything. I could see it in his eyes backstage afterward. He was complete, but he was also empty. The 17 days between the concert and Ozzy's death took on a different quality. He was peaceful in a way I'd never seen before, Sharon revealed. He kept saying, "I did it. I really did it." He wasn't talking about the performance. He was talking about dying as himself instead of as a victim. Sharon's decision to help Ozzy fulfill his final wish redefined everything about love, sacrifice, and what it means to truly honor someone's deepest needs. "People ask me if I have regrets," she said. "The honest answer is that I'll never know if helping him perform that night shortened his life or gave meaning to his death. But what I do know is that he died as Ozzy Osbourne, not as a man defeated by disease." The Villa Park concert wasn't just Ozzy's final performance. It was Sharon's ultimate act of love. She had risked everything, including her own peace of mind, to give her husband the ending he needed. In the end, Sharon reflected, loving someone sometimes means helping them do something that breaks your heart. And I'd do it again. Ozzy Osbourne died exactly as he had lived, on his own terms, with Sharon by his side, having reclaimed his identity one final time. What do you think? Did Sharon make the right choice helping Ozzy risk everything for one final performance? When love demands impossible sacrifices, how far would you go? Share your thoughts below and let us know if you think this was the ultimate act of devotion or a tragic mistake.
He was so quick-witted and very vulnerable. I just thought he was the funniest, sweetest guy I'd ever met.
It's March 15th, 2024, and Sharon Osbourne is about to receive the phone call that will destroy everything she thought she knew about her husband's life, career, and the empire they built together. She's sitting in her Beverly Hills office, probably going through the usual business of managing what's left of Ozzy's legacy, when her assistant buzzes in. "Sharon, it's Dr. Richardson from Cedars-Sinai. He says it's urgent about Ozzy's test results." Now, Sharon's been dealing with Ozzy's health issues for years. Parkinson's, the tremors, the slurred speech. She thought she'd heard every piece of bad news the medical world could throw at them. But when Dr. Richardson's voice comes through that speaker, something's different. There's a weight to his words that makes Sharon's blood run cold. "Sharon, we need to talk. What we found in Ozzy's recent neurological assessments, it changes everything we thought we knew about his condition." "What do you mean changes everything?" Sharon asks, and you can hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. After decades of protecting Ozzy from the world and the world from Ozzy, her first instinct is always to circle the wagons. But Dr. Richardson doesn't back down. "Sharon, I've been reviewing Ozzy's medical history going back 40 years. The records from his early tours, the psychiatric evaluations from the 80s, even the brain scans from his ATV accident. And I need to ask you something directly. How much of Ozzy's erratic behavior was actually medical, and how much of it was manufactured?" The line goes dead quiet. Sharon Osbourne, the woman who built her reputation on never being speechless, can't form words. Because what I'm seeing here, Dr. Richardson continues, suggests that your husband has been medically capable of far more cognitive function than anyone realized. The Parkinson's is real, but it's recent. The tremors, the confusion, the episodes that made headlines for decades. John Michael Osborne was actually one of the most methodical, intelligent, and creatively sophisticated artists Marcus had ever worked with. Behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the crowds, Ozzy was writing symphonies. He was composing pieces that would have made Mozart weep. He was creating art that transcended every boundary the music industry had built around him. But here's the twisted part. That version of Ozzy didn't sell records. The real Ozzy, the brilliant Ozzy, the Ozzy who could sit at a piano and bring grown men to tears with his compositions, wasn't marketable. He wasn't the brand they'd built. He wasn't the product that had made everyone around him rich. So they made a choice. Marcus, the label executives, even some of Ozzy's own management team, they decided to kill the artist and keep the character alive. When Dr. Richardson explains all this to Sharon, when he tells her that Marcus Webb has medical records, audio recordings, and documentation proving that her husband's greatest performances weren't his wildest moments on stage, but his most intimate moments in private studios, where he thought no one was listening, Sharon realizes something horrifying. Ozzy Osbourne, the artist, the real creative genius behind the madman mask, had been dead for decades, and she'd been married to his ghost. Sharon, Dr. Richardson says quietly, your husband didn't just survive everything that should have killed him. He survived something worse. He survived having his true self systematically destroyed by the people who claim to love him most. The phone goes dead, and Sharon Osbourne sits in her Beverly Hills office, staring at the walls covered with gold records and photos of the man she thought she knew, finally understanding that everything she'd built her life around was a lie. The king of heavy metal was dead. The question was, could they bring the artist back to life? Let me take you back to 1982, to a conference room at CBS Records in New York City, where the most calculated character assassination in music history was about to begin. Walter pops the tape into his player, and for the next 10 minutes, they listen to Ozzy playing a piece he called Birmingham Lament, a haunting melody about growing up poor in industrial England, played with the kind of technical skill that would have made classical musicians weep with envy. When the music stops, Walter leans back in his chair and looks Marcus dead in the eye. How many people have heard this? Just me and the sound engineer. Ozzy doesn't even know I recorded it. He was just messing around after everyone left. That's when Walter Yetnikoff made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Instead of celebrating the discovery of Ozzy's hidden genius, instead of realizing they'd found something that could elevate popular music to entirely new heights, Walter saw a threat. Marcus, let me explain something to you about this business. We didn't sign Ozzy Osbourne, the piano player. We signed the Prince of Darkness. We signed the guy who bites heads off bats, who pisses on the Alamo, who makes parents across America terrified for their children's souls. That guy sells records. That guy fills stadiums. That guy makes us rich. Walter stands up and walks to the window overlooking Manhattan. This beautiful music you just played me, this thoughtful, intelligent, sophisticated Ozzy, he's box office poison. He's everything our audience doesn't want to see. He's the death of our brand. But Walter, this could change everything. This could show the world that heavy metal isn't just noise, that our artists aren't just drug-addled idiots. This could legitimize the entire genre. Walter turns around, and Marcus later said the look in his eyes was pure ice. Marcus, legitimacy doesn't sell. Controversy sells. Chaos sells. Fear sells. We're not in the business of changing the world. We're in the business of making money off the world exactly as it is. That's when Walter outlined what he called the preservation protocol. From that moment forward, any evidence of Ozzy's real artistic capabilities would be suppressed. Studio sessions would be monitored. Private recording time would be eliminated. Even Ozzy's access to instruments other than guitars would be restricted during official recording sessions. But it gets worse. Walter didn't just want to hide Ozzy's genius, he wanted to actively enhance the madman persona. He assigned a team of handlers whose job was to encourage Ozzy's most destructive behaviors. They weren't trying to help him manage his demons. They were trying to feed them. Marcus was horrified, but he was also a company man. When Walter offered him a promotion and a significant raise to oversee Project Ozzy, Marcus made the choice that would haunt him for 40 years. He said yes. Over the next 2 years, Marcus watched as they systematically destroyed every piece of evidence that Ozzy Osbourne was anything more than a barely functional rock star. Compositions were erased. Piano recordings were destroyed. Even Ozzy's own band members were kept in the dark about his real capabilities. The truly diabolical part was how they convinced Ozzy himself that his artistic instincts were wrong. Whenever he'd try to incorporate more sophisticated elements into his music, whenever he'd suggest a ballad or a complex arrangement, his own team would tell him it wasn't what his fans wanted. They made him believe that dumbing down his music was the only way to stay relevant. And it worked. The more they suppressed Ozzy's artistic growth, the more successful he became commercially. Bark at the Moon goes platinum. Shot in the Dark becomes a massive hit. The crazier the persona got, the bigger the sales numbers became. Marcus kept detailed notes of everything, partly from guilt, partly from self-preservation. He documented every meeting, every decision, every moment when they chose profit over artistry. He kept copies of the destroyed recordings, the suppressed compositions, even Ozzy's personal journals where he wrote about feeling trapped by his own success. By 1987, the transformation was complete. Ozzy Osbourne, the artist, was dead, and Ozzy Osbourne, the product, was everything CBS Records wanted him to be. Profitable, predictable, and completely controllable. The genius was still in there, but it was buried so deep that even Ozzy himself had forgotten it existed. Until 2019, when something happened that nobody saw coming. The artist was about to fight back. It's January 2019, and Ozzy Osbourne is supposed to be planning his farewell tour. Instead, he's sitting alone in a private studio in Malibu at 3 in the morning, doing something he hasn't done in 37 years. Creating music that comes from his soul instead of his brand. What nobody knew, what Sharon didn't know, what his management team couldn't have imagined, was that Ozzy's Parkinson's diagnosis had triggered something unexpected. Instead of crushing his spirit, it had liberated it. For the first time since the early 80s, John Michael Osbourne was staring at his own mortality, and he realized he had nothing left to lose. The tremors in his hands made it impossible to play guitar the way he used to, but they didn't affect his ability to compose. So Ozzy started doing what he'd been forbidden from doing for decades. He started writing real music. The first piece he completed was called Letters to John, a 23-minute orchestral composition about the boy from Birmingham who dreamed of making beautiful music before the world convinced him that beautiful wasn't profitable. He followed it with Sharon's Lullaby, a piano piece so tender and heartbreaking that when he played it alone in that studio, tears were streaming down his face. For 6 months, Ozzy worked in complete secrecy. He'd tell Sharon he was going to physical therapy, but instead, he'd drive to this rented studio space and pour his heart into compositions that would have shocked the world. This wasn't heavy metal. This wasn't the Prince of Darkness. This was the artist that CBS Records had murdered 40 years earlier, fighting his way back to life. By July 2019, Ozzy had completed an entire album, 14 tracks of the most sophisticated, emotionally complex music of his career. He called it The Real Me, and it was everything his handlers had spent decades preventing him from creating. But Ozzy made a crucial mistake. He trusted the wrong person. Kevin Morrison was Ozzy's new A&R representative, assigned to help coordinate his farewell tour. Kevin seemed different from the usual industry vultures. Younger, more passionate about artistry over commerce. When Ozzy played him some rough cuts from The Real Me, Kevin's reaction was everything Ozzy had hoped for. "This is incredible," Kevin told him. "This is the most important music you've ever made. We have to get this out there. This changes everything." What Ozzy didn't know was that Kevin Morrison was Walter Yetnikoff's nephew, and Kevin had been specifically placed in Ozzy's camp to watch for exactly this kind of situation. Within 24 hours of hearing those tracks, Kevin was on the phone with his uncle. "We have a problem. Ozzy's gone completely off-brand. He's recorded classical music, he's written ballads, he's created art that completely destroys the persona we've built." Walter, now in his 80s but still ruthlessly protective of his legacy, didn't hesitate. "Kill it. Kill all of it. And make sure this never happens again." What happened next was the most sophisticated character assassination in entertainment history. Walter's team didn't just suppress the album. They launched a carefully orchestrated campaign to make the world believe that Ozzy was losing his mind. Suddenly, reports started appearing in the tabloids about Ozzy's cognitive decline. Anonymous sources close to the family spoke about his increasingly erratic behavior and troubling episodes of confusion. Medical experts who had never examined Ozzy began speculating publicly about his mental state. The genius of it was that they used his real Parkinson's diagnosis as cover for their lies. Every tremor became evidence of mental deterioration. Every moment of fatigue became proof that he was losing his grip on reality. They painted a picture of a man whose brain was failing him, which made it easy to dismiss any artistic output as the confused ramblings of a sick mind. Sharon, watching her husband seemingly deteriorate before her eyes, became their unwitting accomplice. When Ozzy tried to explain about his secret album, about the music that meant more to him than anything he'd ever created, Sharon gently dismissed it as confusion brought on by his medication. "Ozzy, honey, you're not thinking clearly. You need to focus on your health, not on some imaginary recording project." The cruelest part was that they convinced Ozzy himself that his artistic renaissance was a symptom of his disease. His own doctors, paid consultants of the record label, told him that his desire to create complex music was actually a form of cognitive dysfunction caused by his Parkinson's. By September 2019, Ozzy had stopped going to the studio. The master recordings of The Real Me were confiscated by his management team and locked away. The farewell tour was announced, framed as a heroic final stand by a man bravely battling degenerative illness. The artist was dead again, but this time they'd made sure he knew it was his own fault. For 4 years, Ozzy lived with the devastating belief that his greatest creative work was actually evidence of his mental decline. Until Marcus Webb's conscience finally got the better of him, and he decided to burn down everything he'd helped build. The resurrection was about to begin. March 22nd, 2024. 7 days after Dr. Richardson's phone call shattered Sharon's world, she's sitting in her living room with a stack of documents that Marcus Webb has just delivered personally. Medical records, audio recordings, internal CBS memos, and a handwritten letter from Ozzy that Marcus had kept hidden for 42 years. The letter, dated October 15, 1982, begins with 5 words that make Sharon's hands shake. "They're killing who I am." In his own handwriting, Ozzy had documented everything. How his handlers discouraged him from exploring musical complexity. How they rewarded his most destructive behaviors while punishing his artistic growth. "We have everything," Marcus tells Sharon. The original recordings from The Real Me. Master tapes of classical compositions from the 80s that were supposed to be destroyed. Even video footage of Ozzy playing piano pieces that would revolutionize how the world sees him. The question is, are you ready to let the real Ozzy Osbourne be reborn? Sharon looks up from the letter, and for the first time in decades, she sees her situation clearly. She's 71 years old, battling her own health issues, watching her husband suffer under the weight of a persona that was slowly suffocating his soul. She has a choice to make that will either destroy their legacy or transform it completely. "What are you proposing?" Marcus leans forward. "We release everything, not just the music, but the whole story. The suppression, the manipulation, the systematic destruction of one of music's greatest artistic minds. We show the world that Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just the Prince of Darkness. He was one of the most sophisticated composers of his generation, trapped inside a character that the industry created to sell records." "That would destroy everything we've built," Sharon says, but there's something different in her voice now, something that sounds like hope. "No," Marcus replies, "it would destroy everything they built using Ozzy's name, but it would finally give birth to everything Ozzy actually created." On April 15th, 2024, Sharon Osbourne held a press conference that sent shockwaves through the music industry. Standing beside her were Marcus Webb, Dr. Richardson, and 3 of the world's leading musicologists who had spent months analyzing Ozzy's suppressed compositions. "The man you've known as Ozzy Osbourne," Sharon began, "died 40 years ago. Not physically, but artistically. What you've been watching since then has been an elaborate performance designed to hide one of the most tragic stories in music history, the systematic murder of a musical genius." Over the next hour, they played excerpts from The Real Me, the classical compositions from the 80s, and recordings that proved Ozzy's cognitive abilities were far beyond anything the public had been led to believe. Music critics who heard the materials described them as transcendent and revolutionary. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, #RealOzzy was trending worldwide. Music scholars were calling for a complete re-evaluation of Ozzy's artistic legacy. Most importantly, Ozzy himself, for the first time in decades, felt free to be the artist he'd always been inside. The Prince of Darkness was dead. John Michael Osbourne, composer and musical genius, had finally been allowed to live. Ozzy Osbourne's death wasn't physical. It was the calculated murder of his artistic soul by an industry that valued profit over artistry. His resurrection came when the people who loved him most finally found the courage to tell the truth.
The king of heavy metal was gone. The artist had taken his place. What other artists do you think have had their true creative genius suppressed by the music industry? The Ozzy story might just be the tip of the iceberg. Drop your theories in the comments. Smash that subscribe button for more shocking music industry exposés, and hit the notification bell because you won't want to miss what we're uncovering next.